Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Emery and I'm a private equity associate based here in Toronto, Canada. I know it's been a while since my first upload because to be honest, at the time when I uploaded my first video, it was a side project that I had no direction for the rest of my channel, it's just something that I decided to throw out there and see how it goes, right? And to my surprise, it actually did a lot better than I expected. And ever since that video, I really have not thought about what I even wanted to do next, right? So after giving some thought, I wanted to start the series, what I want to call Explain Like I'm 5, the private equity process. Essentially, this series, I want to just break down some bits and pieces, starting from the beginning to the end on, some of the more fundamental aspect of private equity, right? For now, I want to keep this more of a 3-part series. Starting from financial modeling, which will be the first video that I will upload in the next couple of days. And then after that, I want to talk more about, the qualitative aspect about looking at investments, like the business plan, the market studies, and everything that goes into this document called the investment memo. And the last part of this series, I want to talk about what is called asset management, which means once the deal is approved and you're invested, what do we do to manage these businesses after we're invested? For now, I think those are pretty much the 3 most fundamental aspects of private equity. But if, as the series goes on, people are more interested in other topics, you can leave a comment in the description. If people request enough, then I'll talk about those other topics outside of the first 3 topics. So this video is technically part 0 is because, as the name of my channel suggests, casual business. I want to keep my content more accessible and more understandable for people who might not even be in the field of finance, right? If you're a nurse, if you're a sushi chef, you can watch this video and still understand the process. This will be more of an intro video to me explaining, just some of the brief overviews of what is private equity and how does a private equity fund work. So let's talk about what is private equity. Like the name suggests, it's pretty much the 2 parts, right? Private meaning entity that buys private businesses, and equities on the other side means pretty much like shares or stocks or ownership of a business, right? Which is a little bit misleading because not all private equity firms have to own shares in a company. Sometimes they can lend money to other companies. They're not really restricted to just buying shares of businesses, right? But for the most part, that's what they do. They buy shares or they buy ownerships in private businesses. So what makes private equity different than, public equities? One of the biggest differences, pretty much, you and I have access to public equities, right? You can buy Apple, I can buy Apple, and a hedge fund can buy Apple, except the difference is they're buying a lot bigger volume than we're buying. Private equity, on the other side, a lot of times not everybody has access to buying just any business that's not listed anywhere, right? If I wanted to buy Joe's convenience store from downstairs, unless I know Joe somehow or know somebody who's selling the business for Joe, it's pretty much impossible for me to own a piece of Joe's convenience store, right? So in private equity, there has to be somebody out there who's going out there to source deals, meaning, knowing which companies are up for sale and finding those opportunities for you to potentially invest in. That's not generally accessible for the public. When we're talking about public companies, these are typically the bigger companies, right? When we're talking about Apple and Google, these are just trillion-dollar companies that it's pretty much impossible for one firm to own that big of a part in a public business as large as an Apple or Google, right? So when you're dealing with public companies, there might be a couple, hundreds of thousands of investors in Apple and hundreds of thousands of investors in Google, right? So if a hedge fund owns 15% of Apple or Google, it's kind of hard for them to influence any major decisions of the business, right? Because they have to vote alongside of hundreds of thousands of other stockholders on business decisions. Private businesses, on the other side, most of private equity firms like to hold what they call controlling shares of a business, meaning they want to at least have 50% of the voting rights of a business, right? So the biggest aspect here is private equity firms can actually, for the most part, influence the operating decisions of any businesses that they're acquiring. If say for example, if I buy Joe's convenience store, I can decide, today I don't want to sell chips anymore. I just want to go, more vegan and start selling like apples and oranges instead, right? Instead of, the public companies where essentially you got to be one part of the small decision making process of voting so that you want to switch chips to oranges, right? A lot of times your decisions don't get pushed through, a lot of times that it does. But the biggest part of private equity for the most part is they want to own a controlling share where they can actually, execute the decisions that they want to execute. So in my opinion, the biggest distinction between private equity and, the public stock strategies is private equities try to implement this thing called value add, where they're actively implementing some sort of strategies to improve the business that they own somehow, right? Versus the public strategy where a lot of times the companies are too big for you to own that big of a controlling share or voting share. So essentially you can try to vote, but for the most part you're sitting around hoping that the value will catch up to what you think is worth, right? Maybe you own a company of a public stock that's you think is worth $1 million, but it's actually worth 500,000 today. So you buy in at 500,000, hopefully that the market catches up to $1 million one day, right? That's more like the public strategy. But in the private strategy, essentially you identify some sort of areas of this business that can be improved, and you're actively, voting on these things that you want to improve of this business. And you're not just sitting around, you're essentially telling the management to do this, do that, and if hopefully that increases the value of these businesses. So obviously before you're invested, you actually need somebody in your firm to go out there and find the deals, find the potential investments that you can put your money into, right? Since we're talking about private deals, obviously you need directors with connections out there that can reach to these private deals that you can potentially buy into. So for example, my director knows Joe from Joe's Convenience Store downstairs, and he just happens to engage an investment banker to sell, Joe's Convenience Store. Now this investment banker sends out a deck to us, and then it's up to the associates and the VPs to look at the information about this convenience store and run some analysis on this investment opportunity, right? For example, we think that this area has historically been very health conscious, but Joe has always been selling chips and Coke and Sprite. So then our value add strategy is essentially try to rebrand the store, and instead of selling chips and Coke, we'll sell like oranges or kombucha, right? And then instead of Joe's Convenience Store, we'll name it Joe's Organic Market. So we'll consider how much it costs to rebrand and restock the inventory, and how much potential revenue increase that can come from this, value add strategy, right? So then you run the numbers in your financial model. It costs X amount to change your branding, costs X amount to restock apples and oranges. And then you look at the qualitative aspects. How many people in this area are really health conscious versus, the rest of the public? What's your foot traffic of this potential area? Are there any other factors that, quality of life, income, that sort of thing of this neighborhood that could support your investment and your value add strategies, right? So those combined will go into one of these committee reports that goes towards somebody at the top of the fund who would approve these investments. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that intro for this series, and I'll be uploading part 1 financial modeling to go more into specifics in that aspect in the next video. And just a little personal update for myself. I've been recently involved into this reality show, you can call it. The name of this show is called Six Strangers, and it's run by a couple of pretty big YouTubers. The idea of this show is essentially I meet up with 5 other strangers from across the world, and we meet each other on Zoom and to see if we can build genuine connections from just talking to each other every week. If you guys have seen the show Terrace House, is pretty much Terrace House except virtual and on Zoom. So if anybody's interested, I'll leave a link in the description and you can check that out there. I don't know how my audience will be for this channel after Six Strangers. I don't know, some people might be here for finance content. Some people might be here for, from Six Strangers, and they might not be interested in finance. So if there's enough demand for non-finance related content in the future, maybe I'll start a second channel and see how it goes from there. For now, I want to keep this channel just strictly a finance-based channel, and yeah, hopefully have more consistent uploads in the near future. Of course, in the meantime, feel free to leave any comments about finance, investment banking, private equity in the comments, and I'll try my best to reply to them. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this intro, and I'll see you in a couple days for part 1 of the series.